Good morning and good evening and good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. My name is Ashutosh Sinha, and you are on Scientific Talk. You've been following us, and if you've not been following us, you probably know that at Scientific Talk, we cover multifarious topics and we speak to very senior leaders, captains of the industry, and we touch on some topics, riveting topics, with all honesty and genuineness, speaking from the heart, what's really out there in the market, what's happening out there in the talent market, the business. The world is evolving fast, and we have a very interesting topic and a very esteemed and illustrious speaker for you today. The topic is about the changing, evolving world. How can leaders tackle challenges and reinvent themselves? How can organizations do that? But before we get on to the topic, I'd like to introduce you to the speaker today. I have someone who I've respected and known for a long time. I've been associated with him. I'm very glad that I got a chance to work with him. His name is Mr. S.V. Nathan. You probably recognized him already when you see him on the picture there. Nathan is someone who has been in industry for a long time, and he has too many credits to his. He's a journal who has too many stars on his chest. And for me to describe in simple words is very hard. I won't do justice. But I'll try to make it very quick for those who don't know. I doubt there are people who don't know you, Nathan, but I'm going to make it still quick. Is that Nathan is the co-founder and the chairperson of Visara Consulting. It's an organization he, along with some colleagues, recently set up. And it is on the human capital advisory enterprise development work, which is his forte anyway. Uh, Earlier, Nathan was a CHRO of Deloitte South Asia, where he was a member of the India leadership team and also part of the global talent team. Nathan, as you know him, has also been an amazing author. He has written a book called The Heart of Work, and we'll talk about that shortly. Just be patient. He has 40 years experience, guys, and that is amazing, right? Because we start thinking of reinventing ourselves sometime in our career. And Nathan has done that few times himself, and we're going to cover that shortly. He's a respected voice of the HR professionals in India. He has been the president of NHRDN. He's been the chair at Sumedas, and he's a distinguished XLRI alumni. And that obviously makes him very, very qualified to be who he is, obviously. But beyond that, his experience has shined overall. So, Nathan, warm welcome to the Scientific Talk. I'm not sure if I did justice to your introduction. I'd have loved to go on, but people know you already. So thank you so much for being a speaker today.
Thank you, Ashutosh. I'd like to call you Ashu. That's how I've always called you. It's a pleasure being with you on a talk of this kind. And I really look forward to our conversation today.
Thank you, Nathan. Thank you, Nathan. I've known you as a great narrator, Nathan, and someone who has been an amazing storyteller in the context and concept of building organizations and teams and people and growing careers. You're a mentor in many ways. And one thing which I was really happy to see that your book, The Heart of Work, when it came out, it kind of touched hearts in many other ways because it's not a usual book. It doesn't talk about concepts of going at work. It talks about how one can tread on toes, but if you work from where you really belong in your heart, you can actually take care of a few things and be an inspiring leader and get out there. So I don't want to speak for it myself, but could you tell us a little bit what kind of drove you towards writing that book? And it has, of course, an anecdote of your own life history and your career, which is also beautiful in there.
So, Ashu, thank you. Thank you again. I used to do a lot of writing, small blogs. I used to put out something called Slice of Work, Slice of Life, where I would encapsulate one particular incident or something that has happened. And I would put this in the form of a short story and I would pump this out. And over a period of time, I realized that it has a certain readership, and many people exhorted me to put things together and said, why don't you write a book? And then came the COVID, which was at that time a great opportunity for me to just sit down and start to work on the book. So I worked on the book and cobbled a lot of stories together. And I must say that it's come out very well. It was a bestseller and continues to do well. And I'm very, very happy that this is by the way, this is a book which is a bunch of about 70 plus stories. And they are in various sections. They're one about values, culture, leadership. About 9 different uh, pillars of some kind. But what is interesting is that every time you read any story, by the way, these stories are no more than 4 minutes each. So you almost are able to relate with your own life and your experiences. And then as you read that story, there is something that's happening in your own mind because, in a way, it's playing the tape of your own life, although it could be in a different context. So I just think it's not, by the way, it's not prescriptive. It doesn't say you should do this. There are no frameworks. It's just a very nice, easy, no more than 4 to 5 minutes for any story. Some are even just 3 minutes. But my intention was to leave something behind which stokes the reader's interest to read the next story. So that's what happened. It then came out into a book, and I'm very happy because in some ways there was always this notion that uh, whatever proceeds I get from this book, I should be able to funnel this to a charity. So, which is what has happened. And I feel very, very happy over a period of time, we've been able to generate some funds for this particular charity. So, that's the background to that book. Thank you for asking.
I've seen some really good reviews about the book, Nathan, and a lot of readers who read it have published it on LinkedIn as well. And one of the things which struck me most is that it is not preachy, like you said. It is actually very practical. It is what you're really good at. It talks about real anecdotes and out there which connect with people. So it is simple reads. Thank you for putting this book together. I would say on behalf of the audiences and the readers who still to read it. But folks who don't know the book as yet, I'm going to actually put a link in my post shortly when we air this, later at the end of the day today. But what I'm looking at is we are ultimately also moving towards a very different world, Nathan. And some of the stories in your book also connected with how people can evolve themselves, how people can, or how you have seen that evolve over a period of time in your life history and career history. Um, Someone I was speaking to recently said something very interesting that uh, the person, when he started his career, is in his 28th year of his career, young person, but not very young. And he said, when he started his career, he never thought that the world would be so different than where it is today, not only in technology and AI and things like that, but also the way people have evolved. Organizations started looking at people and culture and the expectation from leaders. And that is making it very challenging because the rule books have been kind of rewritten in that sense. So I would love to hear from you with your experience having led the organizations for a long time. Uh, what do you think uh, is happening out there in the market today from a leadership standpoint?
So, good news out here, Ashu, is that some things about leadership, about how people have evolved over a period of time, and I can speak about my own experience, is that some of these are and will be unchanged. For example, a leader must have a vision. A leader must be able to connect, must be able to develop people, must be able to care. So these are the things which are immutable. This will, whether it is today, tomorrow, day after, infinitely, I don't think any of these kinds of rules will change. But today, there is rapid change. What people want is a leader who can communicate and get people to understand. So, meaning making and purpose has never been so much in the center as it is today.
So true.
That's extremely important.
So
The
true.
second thing which I think, go ahead.
No, no, I was just saying that's so very true. Such a good statement there. Yeah. Mhm.
So, the second thing which I think is very important in today's day and age is that with such rapidity of transformation, technology at one end, a lot of other things happening. What's happening in the world with nature and so on. And I think we are also getting in touch with new kinds of people. For example, the digital natives,
Hmm.
their sense of what the world is or what the world should be is very, very different. So the second set is how do we learn? And the process of also saying, I'm going to let go of this part of me and I'm going to learn something new is a new one. So this the second part is a lot about how does a leader really learn about various things that's happening around. The third one is how much does a leader learn about himself or herself? Because this is going to be very vital in the way of their deployment in their kind of roles. So I think three distinct things. One is understanding self, second, understanding self and systems, understanding self, systems, and what is happening in the larger context of the society. So I think an ability to move through each one of these thresholds is going to be very important for a leader. Back to you.
That's really
Yes.
well, Nathan, and very simply put, actually, which makes it easy to understand because one of the things which starts with self, a lot of people sometimes forget during the course of journey that they need to keep learning, and because experience takes on, and you believe everything is in the experience, and you go from 18 years to 28 years, and then 35 years experience, and people suddenly start feeling that they're shortchanged on what the market is demanding from them, what the organizations are demanding from them. So, do you have any interesting mantra around that, Nathan? Something how, I mean, one thing is obviously it should be in habit. We hear that micro habits and those things which are there out there in the market today, people talk about it. But how do people pinch themselves? Because it's very easy to get caught up in the day to day. When they're, let's say, a young guy, a digital native who's crossed his 10th year of experience and heading towards his career.
Uh, Great question. And let me answer this in two parts. One is to share it through a short story. People learn through experiences. Some of them are experiences which I call as crucible experiences,
Mm,
very life altering. I was a very young manager, and one of my jobs at that point in time, I was pretty new in that company. And one of my jobs was to look after transport. Not a not a great job because you're in the thick of the thick of a place called Jharkhand, which is one of the states here in India. Earlier, it used to be Bihar, and there's a mining town close by, and this is a factory producing explosives. So there's a background. One of the things that we had to do was make sure that as a person in charge of transport, I always have two ambulances which are in fine fettle, as also four fire engines which should be in top order. Other than that, I had a fleet of cars, all of six in number, which is not a very large fleet.
mm,
And just given the road conditions in those days, many of them would be in the garage. It was a Monday morning, and there was somebody who came by and said, I need a car to go to a nearby city called Ranchi. And I said, well, let me take a look at my inventory. I found there were no cars. Everything was in the garage. And even one of the best cars that we had suffered some kind of a malfunction. It was in the garage. And I turned up and I said, I don't have a car. Now, the job was an important one. The person had to go to Ranchi. He escalated the matter to the general manager, who was like the big boss of the place. So I was called by the general manager to his office. And the general manager, when he looked at me, he really tore into me. I mean, he was really very upset that I had not taken care to at least keep one car in good condition that somebody could use. And I was new in my role. How could I explain that all the cars were in the garage? There's nothing I could do. But if you could wait till afternoon, I would be in a position to have at least one of them repaired and the job could be done. No amount of entities help. And suddenly the door opened And in rushed a gentleman who stood in front of me, looked at the general manager and said, "The boy may be responsible, but I'm accountable." And
Hmm.
then he looked at me and he said, "Nathan, you may go." I ran from the place. He happened to be my boss, the administration manager. And I don't know what happened. I learned 5 minutes later that the problem was all solved. And there was a very beaming gentleman who came to his office, and I was seated out there, and he said, "Nothing is all solved, everything is done." So I was very curious. I said, "How did you do it?" He said he was going to shout me down. All I did was I took out my personal car keys and handed it over. I said, "Somebody could use my car. It's okay. There are drivers around the place. They could use my car. If it is so urgent, somebody can use my car." Now, the general manager actually at that point in time felt a little small because even he had a car. He could have offered his car. But that's the story. But this is one of the life altering stories for me because it sowed the seeds of leadership. Leadership is, I mean, it was very easy for him to just allow for the general manager to run me down. He did not. He stood up for me. Leadership is to stand up. Stand up. In that hour, I learned that you never put any person on your team under the bus. Vital.
Amazing.
Something that happened years ago when I was a young manager. I carry it to today because I think this is one of the fundamental. So when I talk about some things don't change, some qualities don't change, this is one of them. And I can talk about my most recent experience. So we are a new age HR consulting company, but whatever that is, one of the things that we are working on is in the domain of AI. Now, do I know anything about AI? No, I don't know enough to save my soul. And I have my co-founder, his name is Sri, and he will talk 19 to the dozen. He's very knowledgeable and he's like a fountainhead of knowledge about AI. I could go into client meetings and be that very smiling person nodding heads, but I decided that as a leader, I can't just be doing that. So here is what I started doing. And I hope that in the next, let's say, 15 days or so, I would know enough about AI. Every day in the morning, I would spend about 45 minutes reading or listening to podcasts or get onto the YouTube and learn as much as I can about AI. My goal in the short term, uh, Ashu, is to make sure that I know as much, if not more, than the people that I'm working with. I know it's a tall ask, but that's the nature because some things which happen to you as part of leadership, you're thrown into the deep end, you either sink or you swim. This is the reality of today. Leaders are seeing disruption of a completely different kind. They're having to handle things that they have never handled before. So that's the story. Some old values don't change, but the one about learning and relearning is absolutely important. If you have to stay relevant in this world, then I think it starts with just being humble and saying, "I don't know enough," and then start to work on it and start to read and read as much as you can, meet people, because what people tell you of their experience is far more valuable than reams of paper that you go through every day. Back to you.
Thanks, Nathan. Those and that anecdote was both of them were actually great accounts. And I think it also goes back to your earlier point that if you have a sense of purpose where why you're doing this, the self-pinch on trying to get that learning, acquire them from various channels. And this knowledge is so beautifully available nowadays, thanks to technology and everything, comes there. And it's very impressive that the way you took on even the current challenge of, with all your experience, adding this new leaf of learning book in your own portfolio or in your knowledge is amazing. So I think if you can do that, everyone can do that. And thanks for narrating that. You touched on a very interesting word there, and that's a trait, it's an attribute, it's a quality. which I've seen when I worked across. I had a good chance of working with great consulting firms, but also, with some family-run organizations. And when I was working with the board and family owners, one of the things they asked me when we used to bring on people on board was to find leaders who have a sense of humility, along with the other great qualities they have. Because at a certain age and experience, especially when you cross 25 years experience, you reach a point where you, like you said very well, uh, it's hard to unlearn or even relearn. And that block is because you develop a bit of an experiential shield around you, which you think you know everything, and people kind of start living in that bubble where they find it very hard to prick it and learn more. And that's where I think humility starts, where if you know what yourself and you have that sense of humility, you can pick more things. So when you touched on that, one thing which I going to ask you in the same context, there are various leadership traits in the future of work, in the direction things are heading in the direction leadership is evolving in organizations. What be your advice to leaders and organizations, humility being one of them, on the few traits which leaders must have, right, from your perspective, um, in the coming age and the coming era, or let's say in the next 5 years? So, in decade is hard to talk these days, but at least for the next 5 to 8 years. Any ageless wisdom there?
I don't know what ageless wisdom, but there are a couple of thoughts that come to my mind. I think the ability to the ability to be constantly curious is an ability that will really shine through for the best of leaders in today's context. Curious about people, curious about data, curious about the whole notion of why is this happening the way it is? What does this data say? What is the pattern? What are the insights that I can get from this? The curiosity as a quality is going to be paramount for any leader in this coming age. So that's number one. I think it's that is one. The other one is the art of the conversation. And there are several types of conversation. One is a conversation where you seek to understand. One is a conversation where you seek to let people know what you know. There could be negotiations of any kind. But the one conversation that I'm very particular about is what I call as the crucial conversations. Crucial conversations are one where one could take one path or the other depending entirely on that conversation, the amount of time that somebody spends in that conversation. These could be with people because no organization can do without people. So, what kinds of conversations do you have with people? Many of us have a lot of beliefs. Some of them could be limiting beliefs. So, if there is a leader who focuses on the potentialities ahead of that person and sees value in somebody sitting across, I think that would be fantastic. And evoking that amount of self awareness in the other person is that crucial conversation. Giving confidence to that person that he or she can do that is going to be vital. People come to leaders because they want to seek solutions, but leaders are there not to provide the solution, but they should be good listeners and they should be able to ask good questions. So, the art of the question is going to be very important for a good leader. How do you get people to understand their own purpose? Because once you find people understanding purpose, what are they doing, what they are doing, I think, people will start to discover themselves. And the last point before I turn this back to you is the best of leaders in the world that we have read of, seen, continue to see, be inspired, are those one who respect others. And I'm not talking about respect as in respecting people for what they bring in as their value, but even to the last man standing who believes that he also serves who only stands and waits. To respect a person who is a doorman, to respect a person who's a person operating the lift, perhaps. I think the kind of respect that you show in a very authentic and genuine way will set a leader apart from the others. Because once you start doing it at not just a level, but every single person, then they will see themselves as feeling valued. And in today's age, given the potential that people hold, all they ask of anybody is not another 30 pieces of silver, is respect me for who I am, not for the kind of clothes I wear, or maybe I have my pierced ear and maybe you don't like that ring out there, but respect me for my individuality. Respect me for what I am, who I am. I think today's leaders are very, very good. They're all very, very, I've not seen the kind of change in so many years as I've seen in the last 10 years, and particularly in the last 5 years. And I'll give you an example. The ability for many leaders to embrace differences, the kinds of people that they bring in. Today, the most, the best of leaders, what they do is they accept people for who they are. Today, if you see that there is an advancement of the cause of LGBTQI is because of this, because people understand that. So on that note, I'm going to turn this back to you.
Thanks, Nathan. I think clearly you touched on a few very important things there. And I hope we're getting a lot of questions here. Uh, I hope all the listeners who are listening to this, air right now, uh, please keep your questions coming. But some of the things Nathan just said, especially the last bit, touched me really, really closely because what's really happening is in the market that things are evolving very, very fast. We are actually seeing a global change in geopolitics. You're seeing a change in economies, in the job scenarios, technology, AI. Every probably few months, every quarter, every year, we hear a new development. And there's an interesting barometer which Nathan I've seen is called World Uncertainty Index (WUI), which IMF or some of the economic indicators publish, and that has started going crazy. It's kind of like number of events per year is like never before. And in the face of that, it's an interesting segue to one more question, which I thought for the benefit of our listeners here and some of the questions we got, when we started collecting interest for your being here is in this changing environment, people are also beginning to lose jobs, unfortunately. And that's a hard hitting factor. Never before in history, at Scientific, we recently published a paper where never before in history, so many people across the world in their mid career are out of jobs than ever before. And not because there's a depression, not because there's a global phenomena, but because it's just like that. It's a trend which is growing. And it kind of, at one level, touches me deeply because uh, I try to do my bit through advice and through our career advisory team and scientific and things like that. But beyond that, sometimes I also dwell on that is this something they should be doing? People who are still two people, right? The people who are currently in their jobs, mid-career leaders. I think everything we discussed so far on the show, they should definitely listen to that. They need to be ready to have the humility to learn, pitch themselves, and have the art of conversation, ability to go back to their past learnings and the mentors and pick that up and take it forward. But beyond that, people who have lost their jobs right now, or people who are stuck in their jobs trying to find a purpose, what be your advice to them, Nathan?
First of all, I don't want to give any advice as such, but I will share my experience with you.
Sure.
So several years ago, I was a CHRO of a particular company. It so happened that This was during one of those downturns. It was pretty bad. The the organization, the company was bleeding. We had to let go of people. And every time you let go of people, the notion was that you would have saved so much money. One day I looked at myself, and I was I was, let's say, mid-career at that time. One day I looked at myself in the mirror and I said, Nathan, you are a big cost. And the moment I realized that my salary could feed a few, I went up to my boss and I said, I thank you for all that this organization has done. I think it's now time for me to move on. I never told him about the background and all that. And I said, I would like to leave the organization. Of course, they tried their best to retain me, but I was very clear that I didn't want to stay because somewhere it hurt me that um, I think we should be eating the same food that we prepare for others. So I I said, this is the best thing that I could do. But having jumped on that, this was a time when I was facing up to reality. It was a downturn. Nobody was going to hire. Nobody was going to hire at the kind of cost people would have for a CHRO. And why? There are no such jobs available at that point in time. It took me another 69 days to find another job, Ashutosh. 69 days. I'll never forget that. The 70th day, I managed to get a job, and of course, things moved. But I'll tell you what I did in those 69 days. I sought feedback. I went up to all my friends, I went up to my bosses, I went up to people who were around me, and I said, give me feedback. Tell me what you think is good about me, is not. What do you think could be a better version of me? What could I do better? And I collected a ton of. So I think it's important to start to write. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? Now, if the weakness is something which is career altering, then I think that's something that got to work on. But otherwise, just focus on your strengths. So I started to look at what are my strengths? What should I be doing? All I needed was not a resume, because there are a lot of people who can write a better resume. I just need to do better at networking. I understood that it is important to network. When you network, you have an access at least to people, and perhaps through that, I would be able to wade and find my way, which is what finally happened. Because once you're through the door for an interview, then you would be able to showcase your talents. So this is one on how I found a job. But the more important one is how do you develop your resilience? You still have mouths to feed. My children at that time used to ask me, Dad, you're not going to work. How do I tell my children that I'm out of a job? Today, it's easier. You could say I'm working from home. But it was not the case in those days. So somehow you got to pat the children and say, no, go off to school. Papa is working. He's doing this, doing that. The one is, how do you handle resilience? I think it's a very important thing. How do you find courage within yourself to say, I'm going to do this, I'm going to last this out? The other one, which I found was something that helped me at that point in time, was I started to write. I started to write, and I said, I think I should write, because once start doing things that you like. I also started to run. I found a lot of release in running for 30 minutes a day, sometimes even in 60 minutes a day. I started running. I found that after every run, when I came back, I felt much better. So I started to exercise. I started to get into some kind of a regimen. And it has helped me very well, Ashu, because even today, some of those habits, some of those disciplines help me. Feedback is very important. Then some of us could also be stuck in a certain kind of a role. I discovered, quite by accident and by design, that every time I moved a job, I moved from one industry to another. I didn't continue with the same industry. I was in manufacturing, then I came to telecom, then I came to software, IT, services, then of course professional services, which is a completely different kettle of fish. So start to look at what you can experiment with. I think that's the third one that I experienced of myself. You need a lot of friends during your dark days, and so I sought out my friends. They gave me, I mean, not that they gave me jobs, but at least they gave me a shoulder to lean on. These are things which are important. Tremendous faith in oneself and one's abilities is the one that will ride through. So those are the few things that I did. As I said, I got a job. Then I understood the value of anybody losing a job. So I'm very empathetic. Anybody, so it does happen in organizations that you have to separate some people. Now recognize that you brought the best of people into organizations. You sold them a vision of what their lives could be. And in years hence, there is a different story altogether for that individual. So I started to look beyond just the numbers there, because behind every number, there is a human. So how can leaders start to think and say, okay, how can we take the best use and work to people's strengths? So those are the few things that I did, Ashu. Maybe it's a long narrative, but back to you.
No, nothing. I'm so glad that you donated a personal anecdote because that connects so well with everyone who hears it. Because it's easy to say, do these six things or five things, and they're there out there, right? But anecdote kind of relates, it has got relatability. And I think people can pick their own lessons and wherever they are in any of these parts of it, because there are many lessons out here. Um, there is another very important thought prodding my mind, and I'm conscious of time, but I promise you, there's probably one or two more questions, and this is actually very, very important to ask you. Something which has personally worked for me, and you touched on it in a different way, has also been reinventing yourself, your career, even if you're not out of a job, even when you're in a job, and you touched on that so briefly when you said that by changing industries, by adopting new skills, or whatever that might be, or roles. I remember anecdote which I very happily would like. I have quoted another show actually myself when I was a speaker, that there was a time when you and I were working together, and there was a role which seemed very complex and tough. And you said, and I had a very nice role already, and you said, "Do you want to take this on additionally?" And I said, "Let me take a quick walk and come back." And I just said yes, one, because of the belief in leadership, but also because I thought here's a huge opportunity to learn something I've never done before. And that was throwing me in the deep end myself for myself, but it taught me so much. It made me a greater leader. And my skill repository went up by probably 5x or 10x after that. So I was using that example and otherwise what you said. How does one reinvent oneself in the course of a journey? And this is applicable to the 30-year-old or the 40-year-old or the 50-year-old professional as well, in the context we're discussing.
Um, Again, no pontification, but I'll tell you of my experience. I think every time you move into a new role, there is new learning. Um, you reinvent yourself by starting from scratch, by talking to people. I was very inspired. Many, many years ago, I met a colleague of mine um, who had taken on a role as a CEO in a large company. And he didn't know that industry very well. And one of the things that he decided was that in 30 days, he's really going to understand that industry very well. He brought in mentors, he brought in subject matter experts, and they started to speak to him. And then over a period of time, he understood that a lot of the new businesses, and he also asked the searching questions, what people could not respond to. So again, no pontification, but I'll tell you of my experience. I think every time you move into a new role, there is new learning. Um, You reinvent yourself by starting from scratch, by talking to people. I was very inspired. Many, many years ago, I met a colleague of mine um, who had taken on a role as a CEO in a large company. And he didn't know that industry very well. And one of the things that he decided was that in 30 days, he's really going to understand that industry very well. He brought in mentors, he brought in subject matter experts, and they started to speak to him. And then over a period of time, he understood that a lot of the new businesses, and he also asked the searching questions, what people could not respond to. So one can reinvent oneself through asking the right questions of oneself. Do I know enough about this? Is this an area of my interest? By the way, we should also be careful. I don't ever say that you should just jump into a pool without even testing waters. I think it's important to know what are your strengths, what are you capable of. If I am a person who is very good in one particular area, then one way is to understand what I can do more of. What are my adjacencies? What are the new things that I can do around it? That's one way to reinvent oneself. Radical reinvention of a person is very rare. Some people do that with panache, but for for most of us, and I would include myself in that, is change happens when there is a willingness to change. I put it this way: when there's a open mind and a willing heart, change can happen. If you want to reinvent yourself, first feedback at one end, because people will say these are the things that you ought to do. We look at all our appraisal conversations, right? They're so transactional, which is why I say crucial conversations. How do you inspire people at the end of that conversation? When they leave the room, the person should say, I've learned something about myself. So, can we learn something about ourselves that we don't know? And we are prepared to learn because we have an open mind. And we have to be determined. We say we have to do it, we will go ahead and do it. The humility to accept that we don't know enough about this and start ab initio, have people. There are, I call it reverse mentoring, right? I mean, you have a lot of young people who can tell you a lot of new things. Keep the company of young people because they will challenge you. Keep the company of people who would always say things to the contrary, because then they would give a contrarian view. Not to challenge you, but to let you know that there is another point of view, there's a contrary point, and therefore it's good, always good to also surround yourselves with people who say something very different, because they're bringing in a point of view. You can also reinvent yourself, and this is my favorite. Read 7 pages a day. If you can't read 7 pages a day, read 7 paragraphs a day. If you can't read 7 paragraphs a day, read 7 lines a day. If you can't read 7 lines a day, at least listen to at least 1 minute of any podcast that you do not wish to listen to, because that one would be able to open your mind and give you new ways of thinking about yourself. So back to you.
Again, so simply put, Nathan, very profound, especially I want to call it a formula because it will do to injustice, but what you said at the end as well, connecting back to where you started with this conversation is so good because it is practical, right? This is a practical tip. It's not that reinventing is a mountain where people have to start all over or go and seek like a huge university skill or something like that. These are small micro changes and learning anecdotes one can pick up. Uh, and it starts with asking your question to yourself. So I do want to underscore that point. That's so important. I promised two more questions, but I'll actually have two more questions even now. I'm just so enjoying this conversation, and I can promise you the amount of questions we're getting here today, I'm sure all our listeners are enjoying it as well. Um, Nathan, you know, there's a, and I would love to have Sri maybe talk about this as well, but from what you've gathered, based on your being such a tall leader, and you've consulted with a very known, well-known Big Four firm in the past with Deloitte and others, you have seen clients and other people that there's a changing technology out there. AI is coming real and fast, right? While there's one subject around jobs, and we spoke about that at length today, and I'm sure people took up a lot of notes on that. At the other end, there's also the struggle of, is really AI as um, much of a business killer, in the sense of people getting worried about that is going to shift things fundamentally and make businesses change on the heel. The other view, I was listening to a couple of very tall leaders from Silicon Valley the other day. They said it's an asset if it's rightly implemented, and if not rightly implemented, of course, it can be a killer. So what is your view and thought about, with this technology advent happening, uh, where are the organizations heading, both in the light of talent they keep and also in light of the journey they're on?
AI is going to stay. AI is something that we must embrace. AI is something that's going to make life a lot easier. Um, AI is also something where, first of all, it is artificial, which means you have to feed in a lot of data, and then the computer then gives you back that data in a different shape and form. Because there is, at one end, there is some learning out there. The machine learns for itself, and then it puts things together. And it's called artificial intelligence because it is trying to get as close to the human intelligence as possible. But there are a few things that artificial intelligence cannot do. It's not creative. So creativity is still in the realm of, there's nothing called emotions. The whole sentient processes that you would have anywhere is not there in AI. AI is not a social animal. Of course, by the way, they are now training it so that one day it becomes a social animal. But I don't think there is anything about a human touch and a feel. So there are no feelings. So those are some of the things. I think it's important for us to embrace AI. It's going to make jobs a lot more easier. You got to use it in the right frame and recognize that it's not an absolute thing. Very, very simply, this, when you're going to be writing a letter, or maybe you're sending a text message, I mean, the easy one of what AI has is, my um, you want to send a message of condolence to, because there is a bereavement in somebody's family, and says, I'm very sorry to hear about the loss of so and so. My heartfelt CON. CON can be either condolences or my hearty congratulations. And sometimes AI will push congratulations, not because it has understood the first few lines. We then have to be vigilant and say, okay, I think this will be condolences, and start. The autocorrect function that you and I sometimes get very irritated with is
Yeah.
because there is an override of human intelligence there. I'm now taking it there at the basics.
Yeah.
Jobs as such are going to change. The ones which are repetitive, where there are rule set jobs can be done by AI. We had the same fears which happened when the days of automation came by.
Hmm.
I don't think people are going to lose jobs. I think people are going to lose, I think AI is going to fetch in so many jobs that we could be right there in the center and say, my, this is exactly where I would like to be. So some of those fears are completely unfounded. And the more that I learn, and by the way, I'm not a master at this, the more I learn, the more I feel that there are opportunities abound for people who understand that AI is all but a tool that is to be used. Back to you.
Thanks, Nathan. That certainly helps. And I'm sure it'll rest a few minds on people who are worried about it as well, because the embracing is the key. Thanks so much for saying that. Um, this is the last question, like I promised. I would love to go on, but maybe for the sake of our audience, they have to go somewhere, and for us to make it a connected event here, what would be your one word of advice or thought for leaders who are looking to move in a direction where they are not today? And what I mean by that is not just reinventing themselves, but they are finding it hard despite of all the challenges, because despite of trying their best to find a job and everything else, and they're still finding them. And you've been there, you've seen that how hard it is, and it is that empathy is huge for such folks because it run and a house or pay mortgages and things like that. So touching on that topic once again is that someone who is in that state for many many months, one of the things that you said was to do a few things to invoke yourself and be fit and take it forward. But if the person is
Network. Don't forget network.
and network, absolutely. And but if the person is finding it hard and they're not having the uh, courage to do that anymore because they've been doing that and still not showing results for 6 months, what would your one word be to them, or a few sentences be to them?
My central philosophy of my life, right from a student, was water cuts rock. Don't give up. Don't give up. There will be a day when the yellow river will turn clear and the wheels of fortune will turn in your favor. I've always believed in it. I've always believed in it. I think our job is just not to give up, but to persist, because things will open up. And believe in yourself. Believe in yourself. That's it. And also start being creative. I mean, if nobody's giving you a job, be a job creator yourself. Be an entrepreneur. There are many people who have jumped into this and done exceedingly well. Use every one of these as opportunities to discover something about yourself that you didn't know that you had it in you. It always works. Back to you, Ashwin.
Super. What a beautiful way to wrap this up. And guys, if you're in that situation which I spoke about, don't give up, persist, and things will turn your way. It seems hard right now, I'm sure. But if you got this show later, go back, wind up to the earlier part. There's some great advice there from Nathan. And we're here for you. Feel free to write in to the scientific advisors, or feel free to write into Nathan on his direct. He's very kind. I've seen him. He responds to most of the messages, though he's a very busy man. He has also reinvented himself, and Visara Consulting is a new, I don't want to call it invention, but he's a co-founder and chair, like I said earlier. And that's his new phase of life. I mean, he's done it all and is still going strong. So Nathan, congratulations and kudos to setting that up to you and your co-founders. And thank you so much for being here today and sharing those thoughts and observations. And you don't like to call it wisdom, but I would still say wisdom because it's going to help a lot of people. Thank you so, so much today for being here.
Thank you, Ashu. You have a great way of stoking the best out of the people that you work with. And today is no different. You're a great leader yourself. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thanks, Lord Nathan. Very kind of you to say so. And we'll continue to have conversations. So thank you, everyone who's been listening. And do post your comments, thoughts, whatever you have, questions, or write into us at the email ID given by the scientific team. And we'll be very happy to help you out or get you unstuck wherever you are, or at least reach out to help you in whatever you want us to seek or give advice on. So all the very best. And that's it for today. Uh, with that, Nathan, thank you so much again. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Ashu.